Hey Planet Earth, Untamed Druid again coming at you live with video 17, calling this one Barriers to Enlightenment. Yeah, today's a little bit, I guess, a darker video, but it's not really supposed to be dark. It's just, we're going to be talking about some things that can evoke emotions in people, and they can potentially be dark emotions, so I gotta say darker, but it's not really supposed to make anyone, despair or it's not supposed to be dark. It's just, you know, it, some things, once you start questioning about reality and looking into what we actually do know, as far as information that doesn't have to be corroborated by science, that any basic person can know. Once you start getting into those kinds of questions, you could just say that it's going to be dark because it's deep. And if you're not necessarily fully paying attention to everything that's being explained, it can kind of get nihilistic and a little hopeless. So I'm trying to avoid that by really what I think is elaborating on it's a common faux pas of people that are trying to help people like identify themselves or discover themselves or what have you, or just deal with psychological disturbance or like constant inferiority complex, just some of the issues that I I have experienced when people try to help someone get over those issues. That's what this video is going to be about, and those are what I see as barriers. So yeah, uh, today let's talk about the limits of our physical existence or our physical selves. We as individuals can only feel so good, we can only be so correct, and we can only live for so long. There are highs that make the act of living unbearable. There are truths that are only revealed to us after we accept that we are defeated. The perfect life is an endless dream which can turn into a waking nightmare of lifeless repetition and false death. It seems as if darkness is all around us and plotting to take us out. Yeah, so, if once you start really getting into trying to know anything and trying to situate yourself in knowledge, one of the first things you run into is how empty certain kinds of understanding is, or different people's ways of understanding the world. They simply benefit the individual and they don't really have any meaning. So how do we combat that? How do we defeat the all-consuming nature of nature, and how do we really exist in light when the all of existence is darkness? How do we get over that kind of implied I don't want to say implied morality, but kind of implied standard of everything's dark, so you should just be dark too, and you shouldn't shine your light. And if you shine your light, the darkness will be right behind you to try and smother you. How do we deal with that? To me, that's what's very important. And it's really important to lay things out in a way where you're painting an accurate picture, and that's why I emphasize the darkness, because it emphasizes the importance of the light and how the light doesn't just exist. In the natural world, the light is a fleeting substance, and the darkness is more prevalent, you know. So, and if people get information from, you know, whatever source that is saying everything is love and everything is light, well, you know, it's like, I get that in an ideal sense, but then, you know, under any kind of scrutiny, it's just like, well, then why are there bad things? You know, why are there things that aren't full of love and aren't full of light? You know, so it's just like, there's inherently like half of the story that's not being communicated, where obviously not everything is love and light. So, you know, it's like, to investigate that is more important, and I think it doesn't even go against the everything is love and light. It just redirects your attention back onto the things that you can kind of control, instead of trying to control things outside of you, or people outside of you, or events, or what have you. Um, yeah, so I mention these things as a counterpoint to the often faced charge of fixing yourself, or writing your house, or owning your experience. You just gotta own your experience, man. You gotta, sorry. Yeah, you gotta own your experience. You know, you know, you're responsible for everything that goes on around you. You know, stop blaming others. You know, this is often supposed to be insightful uh, information. This is supposed to be enlightening information. Oh, I just gotta stop blaming others. I just have to own my experience, you know? As if, you know, it's like, what does that mean? You know, if somebody rear ends you, you know, oh, I'm just not supposed to blame that person. I made you rear end me because that makes sense. And it's just like, no, see? And they don't really address, it sounds good to not blame others, but it's, you know, there's just information missing, where it's just like, well, I constantly blame others and I cannot stop not blaming others, you know? And it's like, I come up with situations where it's like purely only the other person's fault, and 100% cannot be my fault in any physically tangible way. So maybe it's like a projection of unconscious type of thing, but it's like, even there, it's just like, well, see, I can make, you know, if you can project your unconscious and people will act it out, then it's just like even more alienating, you know, where it's like, you literally are responsible for everything that everybody does. And it's like, once you get there, then it's just like, well, are you God? And then there's all these interesting questions that come up. So, I kind of forget where I was going there, but um, anyway, they tell us that this life is hard. It's a hard journey, and you'll only find the will to face it if you act as if you are responsible for everything around you. This is a subtle conclusion that is the launching point for many people who speak of helping individuals realize themselves. While it's not a fully incorrect statement, there is a quick movement that takes place. Um, Generally, this movement is to avoid excess emotional release prematurely, as the reality of what is spoken, or as the reality of what is not spoken, is enough to cause even the strongest will to give up and deem their destiny impossible. This explosive truth can sever an individual's ability to trust. So, a word of warning. The movement of which I speak is akin to somebody quickly removing a water balloon from the water spigot, tying it up, and then grabbing another one. You know, like in, you know, like 5 seconds or whatever. They just pull it off the thing, tie it up really quick, grab another one, do it again. That's how I see this. I call it a movement, but it's really a shifting of your attention, where you know, they focus on yourself, you know, which is the idea, and they're saying, you know, don't blame other people because you can't control them, you know, and, you know, really own your experience and do all of that stuff. And it's just like, right. And I don't necessarily disagree with that overall. It's just the once you reduce it to stop blaming others, it's just like all blaming other people is incorrect. And it's like, well, actually looking into that aspect of it, I see that as a huge barrier for people, because it's just like, no, that person, whoever in whatever situation, is 1,000% to blame. It is not me, and I'm not blaming others. It's 100 billion% that person's fault. And I feel such a rage, just like a burning, like, just a horrible rage towards this person. And I feel that people get into that instance, and it's inevitably self-destructive, because it's like, well, I'm supposed to just blame myself for everything that goes on around me, and if that person agitates me to that level, then it must be a weakness in my character. I must, have some kind of just flaw, and I have to blame myself, and I have to focus on myself only, and I have to take it in a way where it's my flaw that this person is exacerbating, and I can't, it's a complete detachment from the possibility that maybe this person that you're dealing with, regardless of you in any context, is just a fuck up. Right? Like, that avenue doesn't exist anymore. And I think that it's really important to understand how most people are fuck ups, and it's not, by any fault of their own. It's just, to be a fuck up is to not listen to yourself, and that's it. So if you're not listening to yourself, you're a fuck up. So it's like, there's lots of people that aren't listening to themselves. So there's lots of people that are living just completely unconsciously. So, they're just going to fuck up everything that they do because they're not actively paying attention to it. And it's, again, not their fault, and not something that you can hold them accountable for or get mad at them for, which is why I believe most people just kind of go over this and don't really dig into it, because you can't be mad at people, because you can't be mad that someone's not being conscious, because how do you tell someone to be conscious? It's not possible. So it's just like it's a fight that's not worth having. But for the person that's interested in this kind of stuff and is doing the work, it's going to feel like, man, I'm just making all sorts of improvements. I'm, taking steps in the right direction, and everybody that I interact with is just useless, and it's not really to say that people do or don't have uses, but, like, the content of conversations in a general sense is often completely lacking. And I just see that as a permutation of this inability to own up to these inevitable truths that are really kind of very nihilistic, and they kind of make you question the basis of all everyday interaction, which makes people uncomfortable, obviously. Kind of forgot where I was, but so with the movement I was talking about, with the, stop blaming other people because you can't control them. I mean, it's just like, right. And, it's not to reject that, but it's to say, it's not that it's illegitimate to blame other people or to have hatred towards other people, because sometimes other people are completely to blame. So it's not that having negative feelings about or towards other people is wrong in any way. It's that that will get in your way of your progress. So it's hard to integrate that. So most people just try to push past it and not really talk about it. And it's like, no, you have to integrate the fact that you hate people, to whatever degree, or hate an individual or whatever. That has to be a part of what you're doing. And it can't really be, have jealousy. So, take it out on somebody physically. It's like, it's not like that. It's understand that hate that you feel towards any individual is a hate towards an aspect of yourself, yes, but then also understand that certain qualities that you experience outside of yourself, it's not a sane person that's going to maintain themselves and not have any reservation against what just happened. It means you're damaged, or it means you're sick in some way if you cannot face the fact that something that happened to you was completely outside of your control, and that it was someone else's failing of consciousness. And like there is no one that says that, because then that kind of releases the individual from responsibility. And that's what I'm saying you have a certain amount of responsibility, but sometimes it's just not your job, it's not your fault, there's nothing you could have done, and you need to really remove that sense of I control everything, because to me it's a false statement where you can just get lost because you can actually think that you control everything. And it's just like, well, then why don't you just make whatever you want happen in reality? And it's like, because at the base of it, you obviously don't control everything, but it's just kind of like it's a stepping stone, so you don't have to get stuck in the muck of nihilism. But it's like it doesn't have this further analysis in it, so it kind of, if you're actually looking into these things, there's no one communicating how you deal with the fact that people kind of will suffocate each other. There's it's a hard thing to talk about, and it doesn't get a lot of positive feedback, because it's again sort of dark, but it's like, I mean, it's not true, so it doesn't make it useless. It's just hard to talk about. Okay, so literally what is happening with this movement that I was talking about, literally what is happening is that the revealer of whatever truth, whoever's trying to help you find yourself, or whatever the fuck, I'm calling them the revealer. So what is happening is the revealer exposes the seeker, you, whoever's trying to find themselves, exposes the seeker, excuse me, to the nihilistic nature of reality. That's what's going on when you go to these people. And then the seeker will respond as they will, in whatever way. They've either thought about it or they haven't, and they'll be blown away and have questions, or they'll just go along with it, or whatever happens. But the movement happens when the seeker realizes that their success in this world is directly tied to the ability of an individual to bear the responsibility of others. Instead of spending time accurately detailing the myriad ways in which individuals fail to live consciously and respect other people, seekers are pushed along, hurried along, so as to limit perceived powerlessness in the face of people that actively make their own life anyone else's problems, or anyone else's problem other than their own. So, it's an unanswerable question, a threatening precipice that morally based revealers are more than happy to overlook. So, it's really just me emphasizing that, in the face of a bunch of people that are trying to, not be responsible for things, and get you to be responsible for the things that they don't want to be responsible for, it's like, how much should you really be responsible for? Because, according to everybody else, you're responsible for everything. But conveniently, that just leaves them to not be responsible for anything. So, to me, that's the real basis of why this is worth looking at, because it's just like, am I really responsible for anything, or for everything, or does that just completely benefit you? So, the unanswerable question, the threatening precipice, is how responsible is an individual to the people around them? Okay, so how responsible is an individual person responsible for another individual person? Okay, just in general, with no deeper connection besides them both being people existing. How responsible are we for each other? And this is where the movement occurs. So the answer to that question, how responsible are we for each other? The answer to that question is that we as individuals are not at all responsible for the well-being of those around us. And the movement that occurs is to not acknowledge this palpable truth and attempts to foster forward movement and to say, in essence, despite the fact that every challenge and issue you will face will let me start this again. Despite the fact that every challenge and issue oh man, that you will face will originate directly in proportion to the amount of responsibility you individually bear and your will to overcome said issues. So basically, all challenge that you will face comes from you, and it comes from you, the amount of responsibility that you bear as an individual, and also your will to overcome the issues that face you. So those two things determine the intensity of the issues that you will face in your life. You must engage with the world, bearing maximum responsibility with an indomitable will to overcome the paralyzing fear of powerlessness and not be overwhelmed with rage at those unconscious people around yourself. So yeah, so that's where the movement takes place. So that first part of the quote, that despite the fact that every challenge and issue you will face will originate directly in proportion to the amount of responsibility you individually bear and your will to overcome said issues. So they don't say that part, right? They don't say, because you can hear that and interpret it as, if I just minimize my will to face challenges, then the challenges go away and I don't have to face any difficulties. And it's just like, that's just a very beneficial for the individual, saying that. And it's not necessarily true, because it's not acknowledging the basic mechanics of how yourself reveals itself to you. So you need to, being like, well, I can just not be responsible for anything, and then I'm not responsible for anything. It's like, that's true. And see, people won't let people get to those places, because it's like, yes, that's true, and you can stay there for as long as you want because everything's nihilistic. But the thing about existence is that the longer you stay at somewhere like that, the more you're going to resent yourself, because you're, it's not something that you came upon yourself. If you come up to that conclusion yourself, it's like, well, who's going to tell you to not do anything? Like, who can force you to do stuff? But if you're doing that because someone led you to that conclusion, it's just like, right, you came up to a conclusion where you should just give up and not do anything because somebody else told you that, and it's like, your brain is going to constantly mull that over, and eventually you're going to be filled with rage at yourself because, even in your refusing to take responsibility for anything, you were influenced by the outside to not do that. So you can't even take responsibility for your lack of responsibility. Pretty interesting. I find it incorrect to suggest that any individual is responsible for everything around them, and find it more reasonable and less ostracizing to the seeker to emphasize the ineptitude of most people, and the fact that the relationship that is as consistent as we'd like to have with other people is that relationship we have with our inner sun. Moreover, people's purposes, intents, and paths will be multifarious and often at odds with each other. This is why you must have an iron will. People you know, trust, and rely on will inevitably challenge your will and purpose, and emphasis on any relationship outside of the one between you and yourself will inevitably result in you sacrificing your own will and purpose and intent in support of some other will, purpose, and intent, leaving you an empty husk. Only once we navigate with our inner compass can the shedding of false morals and true enlightenment occur. This, I found, is only reached when we realize the neutrality of the world and people around us. So less stop blaming others and more you're completely correct. Everyone is out to make their lives easier, thus make yours more difficult. You're not wrong for hating other people. You are wrong for letting reasonable contempt contaminate the only important relationship anyone can have. You and yourself. The relationship between you and yourself. And so yeah, that's essentially my analysis for some of the one of the biggest barriers for people, the Enlightenment to occur. You go to a sage, you go to a person, and they tell you how to interact with yourself, but because they are someone who's trying to get results out of you, generally because they're being paid or whatever, they will push you into forward motion without letting you wallow in the nihilism, because everybody needs to do that, because that's where the energy to do things comes from, because nihilism. So it's like, and like there isn't really deep conversations that I've seen, maybe they're out there, but that where people explain the necessity of nihilism and how like over explaining the hopelessness and pointlessness of things is what drives people to engage with the world around them. It's not that everything is so purposeful and meaningful. That kind of in my mind increases fear and increases a sense of everything having to be perfect, so and it's just out of utility to me. Again, that's the utility bias in action. It doesn't benefit someone trying to enlighten you to like allow you to not be enlightened, because again, you paid them. So it's like, we really have to be aware of what we're getting into when we sign up for things like having someone else enlighten you. They're going to push you to think that you were enlightened so that you don't negatively, respond to them or towards them, and it's just inherent in what they're trying to do. So it's not, you can't really fault that person for trying to engage with people, but I fault people for, giving false advice as if, you are responsible for everything, as if you are literally the spirit and not related to your individual incarnation, So it's like we're all spirit, but, we can only be responsible for our individual incarnation. And anybody that's saying anything outside of that is really trying to, I like to see it as a motivation tactic and not be negative about it, where it's just like, it's all up to you. You're the chosen one, and it's like lots of people will take that and run. And I'm just one of those people where it's just like, well, that just is a whole bunch of other things to think about and be worried about. So, like breaking that down and being like, no, 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 no. Sometimes you can blame other people, sometimes it's not your fault at all. And sometimes people are dumbasses. And a lot of time people will refuse to say this because then it gets you ostracized, because people are like, I'm not a dumbass. And it's like, well, what's it mean to be a dumbass? That just means you make basic mistakes, and everyone makes basic mistakes. So everybody's a little bit of a dumbass, So it's like, it's just a context thing. It doesn't mean you can, be raging at people and fucking, run them off the road or chase them down or follow them home or something. It's like, no, it's not nihilism in that way. It's like understanding that, like, you're responsible for all of the actions that you take, and that's it. So you're not responsible for anybody else besides you. So it's like, yeah, you shouldn't blame other people, but the fact that we do blame other people needs to be incorporated, and needs to be explained in a way where it's not because you're a crazy person who's incapable of facing reality. It's like, yeah, see, how is that not supposed to make me feel like shit? It's just like, no, you're totally rational. You can face reality. Sometimes people fucking suck, but we still individually have to mature. And it's just being more real, I feel, with that, instead of being all light and like, ooh, you're still gonna pay me, right? But yeah. Oh, and then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the reality of the Enlightenment. The Renaissance was a period of scientific revolution, and really like it's called the Enlightenment age, and you know, it seems like, especially with religious wording, where it seems like you became enlightened, you became like radiant, as if you gave off light. And it makes sense in religious contexts, where, that would be said, but then that also kind of implies religion again. But also, I was watching Michael Sarian again, and he was talking about, an etymological breakdown of the word, and he was looking at it in terms of being like weight, like to enlighten, to make lighter yourself or your mind, meaning mind. So to enlighten or to make lighter of your mind, and it's like, so the enlightenment isn't you becoming, becoming this torchbearer of this ancient knowledge that is outside of you, and it's kind of implied, where it's like you're enlightened, you're set on fire, which requires energy from outside of you to be added to you. Hold on. Yeah, instead of adding an outside energy source, because most even religious practices will kind of hint at, God is something to be found outside of you, and then you infuse that power that you found outside of you into yourself. And it's realigning the definition to be like, you lighten your mind. It's basically to to have like a knapsack, like a homeless person or whatever. They have that bag that's on the end of a stick, and they just throw it over their shoulder. It's basically, the enlightenment is to take that little bag that you have and to open it up and to take out all the stuff that you have because you think that you're supposed to, based on other people. So you take the bag of your mind and you empty it of all of the contents that are not self-generated, right? And you just take them and you just put them over here, and you take it and you put it over here, and you empty your mind in that way, where you don't think that something's wrong because your mom yelled at you 15 years ago about something, and then you're like, whoa, I never questioned that for the rest of my life. It's really to, you find those things and you make your mind and yourself lighter by dropping off that karmic weight of, you were yelled at, so you have this intense, when somebody starts talking about that, you get really tense because something back in your past happened that made you really tense, and then it got brought up again, so you're getting really tense, and it's to enlighten yourself of that karmic tension, which is what that is, and why you get really tense when that echo happens. To find it, see where it is, grab it, pick it up, put it down somewhere else, and to enlighten yourself and to remove that residual, always gonna happen, every time this happens I do this, just to find those things, pick them up and remove them from your mind. And it's really a process of you asking yourself honest questions, being honest with your answers, writing shit down, going through lists, and just following the process of removing the things from your mind, putting them on the paper, and then removing the paper. Even like just actually burning it, filling a paper full of the things, that the excess content in your mind, putting it on paper, and then actually burning it. That's part of the process of enlightenment. Just really analyzing why and what you think. I believe that is, people mince words a little bit more than that. When you go to a psychologist or a, psychiatrist, I know they're more pills and stuff, but this is just meant to be a, kind of cut to the chase. I know it's 35 minutes, but just a friendly, you're not crazy, you're not wrong for being upset with other people. People are going to try and, there are attempts to condition us, to make it feel as if we can't ever have or show negative emotions, and it's never anybody else's fault. And if you show negative emotion at all, you're to blame, and you need to be tranquilized, frankly. And, you know, I just disagree with that 100%. You know, sometimes other people are to blame. That doesn't mean you get to act irrationally, but it means that, you know, you can't, you're actually wrong in maintaining responsibility for something that you're not responsible for, and it's going to directly limit the ability of you as an individual to enlighten yourself. And a part of the enlightenment is to no longer take that kind of shit seriously. It's not your responsibility, and that's okay. So yeah, I hope you guys liked the video, and hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.